afternoon session, and we'll switch the subject a little bit from reforming and sintering and so on to something else, zeolites, which I know Jens also has been working with, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce now Pierre Gilson from Laboratoire Catalysis et Spectrochimie, and please, co-management on zeolites.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Jens. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm extremely honored to be here, and I'm also, of course, extremely pleased because Jens played a big role in my life quite early on. In fact, my PhD thesis was sponsored by Topse, and I still remember a few years ago you told me that I was already not a young researcher anymore. So a few years ago, as a budding graduate student, I was attending a big meeting at Topse with Aldo Topse was there, Jens was there, Henry and so on. So I was extremely impressed. I saw all these very smart people behaving decently with a young scientist, having fun with science, being, as Michel Boudard said, elegant and relevant. And I decided that I should do something about science and catalysis in my life. So you will have to bear with me, but Jens is one of the persons responsible for that. The talk today will be a little bit, as you say, downstream to what you have been hearing so far. It's basically the coking and the decoking during ethanol to oilseed production. Before I forget, I will thank the people who have been doing the work. It's a co-production between people located in Caen, in the laboratory LCS. We were very pleased to have we still have them, two very good postdoc students, thanks to Chin and Wandalakis. And then this is the staff that some of you already know from Caen, people very good in catalytic zeolite preparation, zeolite catalyst preparation, Zendan Amintova and Valentin Vachev, and then Christian Fernandez, extremely good spectroscopist, and people working with him, Pierre Thomas and Olivier Vicente. And then, as you will see, it's obvious that when you look at coke, you have to do something with the techniques developed in Poitiers by Michel Binet, and there we had a very fruitful collaboration. The funding comes from the French National Research Agency and the Lower Normandy region, and they told us that we should not work with methanol, but we should work with ethanol. So we worked with ethanol. Okay, so the first thing, I will very briefly go over some of the challenges in zeolite catalysis and the answers that are proposed, and some new tools are coming up on the table, so we have to look at them. And then I will just go through a single case study, ZSM5 zeolite, the MF5 structure, and I will look at the coking of this zeolite in the ethanol to hydrocarbon transformation. I will compare a few zeolites, ZSM5, that have been processed in different way, and I will also compare that with materials that are also hierarchical zeolites, the nano crystals. And then I will briefly describe what is happening when you remove coke by combustion of these materials. I will extremely briefly show you that chemometrics could be a very interesting tool. We will just go back to zeolite crystal engineering, so trying to make use of what we have learned there, and then it will be open for questions. So challenge in zeolites, if you look at the recent papers, you see this classic T modulus PowerPoint, and there are two experimental points, and you say that nanozeolites are very good for many reactions, and macro size or micron size zeolites are very good. Well, I don't think that Jens would dare to draw a line on these 2 points, so we should go a little bit further back at the time of Shell in 1984, and there Martin Post, Tiangxi and others published a very rigorous analysis showing that in this particular reaction, the 2,2-dimethyl butane cracking, the T modulus can be used and fits the data quite well, and I have a tendency to believe these things much better than the graphical abstract people show now. Okay. Now, once you have grasped the T modulus concept, it's obvious that if you want to have zeolites more efficient, you have to decrease the length, the diffusion path length, or in another way, you have to change the volume to surface ratio. There are many ways to do that, and this has been relatively elegantly summarized by Javier Pérez-Ramírez. They are so-called bottom-up technique. For instance, you start to make nanozeolites from the start, or in fact, the Topse way, where you try to force the growth of small crystals by spreading the crystal apart or having them transferred by carbon nanotubes or whatever. I will not talk about that. And then you have top-down approaches, where basically you take an existing material and you drill holes inside this existing material, so you don't have all the problems of the processing of these things. Okay. So top-down approach. In fact, here there are very classical tools. The first one, already practiced every day in every refinery, is to use either acid leaching with HCl or steaming to drill ores to create mesopores. Another one, which is in fact older than that one, but was resurrected a few years ago and studied quite in depth by many people, and among them Javier Pérez-Ramírez, it's the caustic leaching. It's a little bit more complex than steaming or leaching with acid. Basically, if you steam or if you leach with acid, you expel mostly aluminum from the framework. If you make a treatment with a caustic solution, for instance, sodium hydroxide, what you are doing is much more complex, but basically you selectively remove silicon now from the framework. Okay? And in Caen, we have developed a new technique based on fluoride ions, where basically you try to combine these two things together and you go after the weak points in zeolites. So basically you dissolve the intergrowth, you dissolve selectively the small crystals, and the end result is that you do not change the silicon to aluminum ratio of the final material. So you create a hierarchical material, but you still have the same silicon to aluminum ratio, and you don't have all this extra framework aluminum that is an opportunity or a problem. So we decided to go for DSM-5. We took one nano-sized crystal, and then we played with these micron-sized crystals. Another thing on the table that was put by the people paying the research was that we should work with commercial catalysts. So we have very good people in Caen to prepare catalysts, but we work with catalysts from a Sud Chemie, now Clarion. And so basically we took the micron-sized zeolite that will be denoted by M, and P stands for the parent. And then we took another of their material, much smaller crystals that we are calling here nano-sized particle, and P for the parent. Okay? So this material basically here contains only micropores. The material here is what I described before. It's a fluoride treatment where the chemistry of the treatment is relatively complex, but you see that on this material, if you do a fluoride treatment, you start to dissolve part of the crystal, you dissolve all the weak points, but it's a very homogeneous process. So there is a very homogeneous distribution of the fluoride ions, and they do a relatively even job. But what they leave behind are mostly macropores. You can, by fine-tuning, achieve also the level of mesopores. And then the last one is the caustic treatment that I refer to MB, against MA for acid, MB for base here. We did that on the micron-sized crystal, and each treatment we repeated on the nano-sized zeolite. So we have three types of catalysts containing micropores, micro plus macropores, micro and mesopores. If we look at these materials, we see first that the sample received from Sud Chemie, so the micron-sized crystal, have a silicon to aluminum ratio of 19, while the material here, the nano, has a silicon to aluminum ratio of 41. And then we will focus, for instance, on the micropore and the mesopore volume. You can see that these materials are of quite a good quality. Okay? When you do the leaching with the fluoride ions, you see that you purify the crystals, so you see the micropore volume increasing. There is basically no addition of mesopore volume, while if you do a basic treatment, then you reshuffle quite a lot, and this has been explained already in a few papers. You reshuffle a lot the pore volume, so you lose microporosity, but you gain mesoporosity. And the story is the same for the nano-sized crystal to a different extent. What you see also here is that the number of Bronsted sites, which are the active sites in this reaction, is relatively high on the starting material. Of course, it's lower here on the nano-sized material because the silicon to rhodium ratio is different. You barely touch the number of active sites by doing the fluoride treatment, and you reduce significantly the number of active sites in the base treated material. In addition, it's a complication that I will not go into here, but you create a substantial level of extra framework aluminium which acts as Lewis acid in this reaction. Okay, so now we are going to look at the test. The test is with the starting material ethanol that we want to transform into hydrocarbons. What we want is, we don't want to do a kinetic study, we just want to load the catalyst with coke, and then we want to remove the coke. So we have chosen a relatively severe condition after an activation at 500. Reaction takes place at 400, 30 bar under these conditions, and the time on stream is between the initial conditions and about 150, 160 hours. Then, and this is the core of the presentation, the coke analysis. We follow the technique that has been set up by the school of Poitiers. Okay, these are the details, but these details, you can find them in many of their publications, and everything is relatively well described, and all the pitfalls to avoid are also described. So I will skip this part, and we will come to the way we analyze the catalyst. So you have the zeolite catalyst, you put it in a reactor, you do the reaction for a certain time, and then you remove the catalyst from the unit, and the first thing, of course, that you are going to measure is the level of coke. The second thing is that you try to wash your catalyst with CH2Cl2, and there basically what you do, you just peel off the coke that is on the external surface or in the mesopore of the catalyst. Okay? So you don't in fact attack the coke that is deeply inside the zeolite. In order to do that, you have basically to destroy the zeolite, and once you have destroyed the zeolite, you have now a solution, and this solution, you can have a part that is soluble in CH2Cl2, and this can be analyzed again by the same technique as here, which are, for instance, the GCMS, but any kind of analysis of a species in solution. And so it's a relatively straightforward thing to do. Okay? There is another part that is totally insoluble. These are very big polyaromatic molecules, but fortunately in this reaction we don't see this. The only types of catalysts where you see this type of coke is, for instance, if you do FCC, so you have a lot of coke and extremely polyaromatic coke. So we will have three types of information: the total amount of coke, the external coke, and then the internal coke that is soluble. So let's have a look at what is going on in the reaction. Again, we don't want to do a kinetic study, we just want to push the catalyst to as fast as possible to coking and analyze what is coming out. So the first thing here, you see that this is the conversion as a function of time and stream. So all the catalysts under these conditions are relatively stable for a decent period of time. The first to triangle, to surrender, is the catalyst, the micron-sized catalyst that doesn't contain any mesopores. The activity just falls down. If you look at the product distribution, the hydrocarbons that are heavier than C3, so without ethylene, you see two families of catalysts that are emerging. The first family is these filled symbols, and these are materials coming from the micron-sized zeolites. So this is the parent. The green one is the material that has some macropore, and this is the material that has been treated with a caustic solution that contains a substantial proportion of mesopores. And you see that hierarchization by post-treatment is quite effective in giving you some improved performance. But it is no match for the nano-sized zeolite. The starting material is here, and then a little bit of post-synthesis treatment is further improving its performance. Here you see again that the ethylene, which is one of the problems that people want to have, either from ethanol or from methanol, is just appearing very fast but decreases very fast. And again, we see two families: the hierarchical zeolite prepared by post-synthesis treatment, and then the nano-sized zeolite. So we decided to have a look at about 40 hour stream of the catalyst, and now we look at the coke content. What you see is that most of the catalyst, with the exception of the micron-sized crystal that has been treated with caustic, so that contains mesopores, have about the same level of coke. We are just leveling around 10% of coke, while this one is going way up. The explanation is that, in fact, this material contains an extremely large number of hydroxidness defects, and these defects are just traps where coke molecules are just falling, and coke is accumulating very fast. So again, if you look a little bit closer here, although we reach the same level of coke, the speed at which you reach the same level of coke is faster on the micron-sized crystal than on the nano-sized crystal. Let's not forget also that on this material, the nano-size, we have a silicon to aluminum ratio of 41 and 19, so we have less inside. Okay, so if we look, this is just a summary of what I just said. If we look at these materials, it would be interesting to have a look at the molecular description of the coke at two levels in order to describe the materials after 60 hours on stream. We will compare basically the same level of coke on all catalysts with the exception of this one, and so we also try to have a look, especially for this material, at 140 hours. So after knowing the level of coke, we are now going to look at what is on the external surface of the zeolite. And what is on the external surface of the zeolite is analyzed by GCMS. And basically we see two families of compounds. The first family of compounds are alkyl benzene, and the second family are alkyl naphthalene. But again, so this is what we call the external coke. We see really two families of zeolite or catalysts appearing. The first one are the nano-sized zeolite, whether it's the parent or the sample that have undergone post-synthesis treatment. We can scrap a lot of coke molecules, if we call these molecules coke. We can scrap quite a lot of coke molecules from the surface, while on the micron-sized zeolites, and we know that they contain a lot of coke, and we know, for instance, that this one contains about 20% of coke, we cannot get anything from the external surface. So it should be inside. And so, if we look, and this is what I just told you. Now, if we have a look at the internal coke, we have this picture appearing. So here, for the MA and for the MB, we extended the time, but you see now that inside, so after dissolving the zeolite and analyzing all the coke molecules by GCMS, you see that the family of molecules that you see inside is extended. You still see alkyl benzene, alkyl naphthalene, but you start to see phenanthrene, anthracene, and pyrene appearing. And again, what is very interesting, if you look at the size of the biggest molecule that we detected by GCMS, they are basically of the size of the intersection of ZSM5. So basically, I mean, coke is a shape-selective reaction. It ends when the zeolite says this is the end of the game. I will not go into the details, but you can see that the complexity of the coke, so the distribution of the different products, it is more complex for the parent micron-size zeolite, and then the material where few macropores have been added. And in NP, if we go back here, we see that all the coke, we don't see any coke on the material, okay? And this coke is external, so you have some light coke, but that was still trapped inside, and then you have the very heavy coke that is deep inside the material. So if we try to summarize what we have known so far, there are clear differences between ZSM5, whether they are nano size or micron size, where you have built some mesoporosity or macroporosity by treatment. And these clear differences, we see them by looking at the products leaving the ZSM5, and we see that also by the nature of the product that are trapped on the external surface or inside the ZSM5. Hierarchization by post-synthesis treatment, so either by fluoride treatment or by caustic treatment, is improving the time on stream stability of the material, but it is no match for the nano-size zeolite. I mean, there is a clear difference between these two families. What we already know also from other studies is that in general, the nano-size zeolite, if they are prepared properly, have a better quality, and by better quality I mean that they have less defect, there is far less silanols, internal, external in this material than on the post-synthesis treated material, because they receive a lot of shock and there was a lot of this destruction of the material, and one signal of that is the presence of extra-framework aluminium. I will not go into this already mentioned. So now let's have a look at another aspect. Let's have a look at the acid side, so the number of acid sites that are present after a certain time on stream, and also what is the pore volume, micro and mesopore volume. I will concentrate only on the number of Brunstedt sites, okay? And so this is the number of Brunstedt sites that disappear as a function of time. And keep in mind that the nano-sized zeolites have higher silicon to aluminum ratio, so they have a lower number of aluminium. And so here, in fact, we show that all the acid sites have been consumed, or have been, the zeolite has been surrounded by coke, preventing the penetration of hydrocarbons. We have the same thing here. The only exception is the material here, which is the micron-sized crystal that they, where some mesopores have been added by caustic treatment. This is the material, by the way, that contains the highest level of coke. So what is important in zeolite is not the quantity of coke, but it's the location of coke, it's the toxicity of the coke. I will skip the number of the Lewis side, and if you look here at the micropore volume, you see that again all the nano-sized zeolites, the micropore volume in fact decreases, but doesn't decrease to zero, while for this material, the micron-sized material, in fact they are all plugged by coke that is inside of the material. So if we summarize here, reminder, we are dealing with two zeolites that have different silicon to aluminum ratio, so it needs to do some gymnastic when you think about the problem. The number of Brunstedt acid site is going down to zero after 50 hours for all the samples. We do not know if it's pore poisoning or if it's pore plugging, but these materials, we know that they are active after having almost no Brunstedt acid sites, so most probably, but we are not yet sure about it, there should be some kind of pore mouth catalysis where coke deposits on the surface keep on working because the catalyst is still working, and we do not see, especially on these ones, we do not see any more pore volume. So again, only on the nano-sized material, some micropore volume remains. This is just the classical interpretation that is used in another reaction, which is the isomerization of N-butene into isobutene, that was studied by Michel Binet, and Crane Young knows also a lot about this reaction. Now, once you have put coke on a zeolite, you want to remove the coke and you want to do some decoking. So once you want to do some decoking, you just remove the catalyst from the unit. And here we took the catalyst that contained, of course, 10% of coke for all the sample, with the exception of the micron-sized crystal that has been treated with a caustic solution, where there is 20% of coke. So this is a relative weight loss. So for this material, in fact, the absolute scale is bigger. Again, here we see two different families of material. We see the material that contain coke, the decoking of this material. These are the nano-sized crystal, so in blue is the parent, and then the post-treatment of the parent. But you see there is not a big difference. There is also a big difference between the nano-sized crystals and the micron-sized crystals. In order to remove about, let's say, 50% of the coke, there is about a 150 degree K difference. So it's a very significant difference. Again, it means that it's much easier to decoke these nano-sized crystals than the hierarchical materials. Okay. Of course, the obvious explanation is that the coke combustion is limited by diffusion of oxygen into the pores, and we have seen that for some of the zeolites the pores are totally blocked, so it's a much more difficult process. The nano-sized zeolites, if you want to remove, let's say, 80% of the coke, you have to go to a much lower temperature, and so the potential for collateral damage, so steaming during the decoking, is much less with these materials. Okay, how am I doing? Still have...
Almost.
Okay. Two more slides?
Two more slides.
Okay. I like this slide because we were looking by operando spectroscopy at basically the coking during a reaction where in fact not a lot of coke is happening. It is orthoxylene isomerization on ZSM5, and after basically one night there is barely 0.1% of coke. I will spare you all the details, but we were able to show by operando spectroscopy and by doing a correlation between the active sites and the silanols and the species on the surface, that in fact the active sites which are here, in fact, are barely touched by the small amount of coke that is present, and the coke is located on the silanols. And I spent a few hours one day between the two things with Pablo Beato in Ligby, and I showed him these results, and at that time he was working with infrared in situ, with the people in Torino, with Silvia Bordiga, in MTO, and in fact he jumped and he said, okay, I understand my results, you have exactly the same thing as I have. I mean, your coke is also going on the external free silanols and also in the internal free silanols. So this is, if you want to prevent the coking, decreasing the number of defects, decreasing the number of silanols, whether external or internal, is a good thing to do. We did that, and I will skip this slide. We just produced two materials in count with the same silicon to aluminum ratio, the same particle size. Everything that we could control was the same, except the level of defects, and you do that by just changing synthesis condition. In one condition you do synthesis under the normal hydrothermal caustic solution, and the other one you use fluoride ions, and the fluoride ion gives you far less defect, and lo and behold, the catalyst is much more stable. So I will just go to the conclusion. Let's take this one. I will just go to the conclusion. What I think are the important take-home message. So far, nanometer size DSM-5 is better than hierarchical, and by hierarchical I mean materials that have been produced by post-synthesis modification. The reason is that the level of defect is much lower. Coking and decoking are strongly influenced by diffusion, and here again you see a difference between. I can advise you to have a look at this paper. This is a collaboration with, when Fred Meunier was still in Caen, now he's in Lyon, again with Javier Perez Ramirez, and by diffusion measurements we try to backtrack to the diffusion pathline that was present in parent zeolite and treated zeolite, and basically in DSM-5 treated in the conditions in the current study, we were cutting in 4 the average diffusion pathline by hierarchization. You do much better with nano-sized crystal because you cut that by at least 1 order of magnitude. And the good news is that nano-sized zeolites can now be produced very cheaply with very high yield. And for instance, you can now prepare phlogisite in extremely high yield and extremely good quality. So if we want to further improve hierarchization by post-synthesis treatment, I think that we should pay a little more attention to the quality of the mesopores that we are building into the zeolites. And I mean, the goal is just to come on par with nanometer size zeolites. These zeolites have also some drawbacks, and they are intrinsically less stable as powders. It's different when they are in a very good matrix, but this is another story. And this is a cartoon showing that on micron-sized crystals, extremely...
I think you had to stop.
Okay.
I'm sure.
Thank you very much. And I've been bothering you with ethanol, so I thought that I would bring to Jens some bioethanol coming from Normandy.
Okay.
It's polluted with some local things.
Okay.
Maybe you can think about the food versus fuel use of that, but
sulfur preservation, I think it will work.
okay.
Okay, thank you very much. One short question. Okay. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
For a very interesting presentation. And we move on to the next one, which is going to be given by Arnaud de Klerk from the University of Alberta. This is going to be on electrolysis or something.
Yes.
Familiar to you?